August 14, 1947, midnight. As the clock struck 12, the world witnessed not one but two nations being born. India and Pakistan emerged from the ashes of the British Empire, but the celebration would be short-lived. What followed was one of the largest and most brutal mass migrations in human history. 15 million people displaced, up to 2 million dead, families torn apart, communities destroyed, cities burning. This is the story of the Partition of India, a story of ambition, betrayal, religious division, and bloodshed on a scale so massive that its wounds still haven't healed, nearly 80 years later. Today, we're going to uncover the horrifying truth about how borders drawn on a map in just 5 weeks would condemn millions to death, rape, and exile. This is the story they don't teach you in school. This is the story of borders drawn in blood. To understand the partition, we need to go back, way back. The year is 1857. The Indian Rebellion, also called the First War of Independence, shakes the British Empire to its core. In response, the British Crown takes direct control of India from the East India Company. For the next 90 years, India would remain the jewel in the British Crown, generating enormous wealth for Britain while its own people suffered under colonial exploitation. But here's what made British rule particularly insidious. They didn't just exploit India economically. They planted the seeds of division. The British perfected a strategy called divide and rule. They conducted census operations that rigidly categorized people by religion. They gave separate electorates to different religious communities. They favored one community over another in different regions. Muslims in some provinces, Hindus in others. The goal was simple: keep Indians fighting each other so they wouldn't unite against their colonizers. And it worked. For decades it worked. By the 1940s, two major political forces had emerged. The Indian National Congress, led by Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi, claimed to represent all Indians regardless of religion. Then there was the All India Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, which increasingly advocated for Muslim interests. But here's the crucial detail most people miss. Jinnah himself was not initially a proponent of partition. He was a secular lawyer who wore Western suits and barely spoke Urdu. He had once been a member of the Congress and was known as the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. So what changed? What transformed Jinnah from a secular nationalist into the advocate of a separate Muslim nation? The answer lies in power, politics, and profound mistrust. Through the 1930s and early 1940s, Congress and the Muslim League competed for influence. Congress won major victories in the 1937 provincial elections, but in their moment of triumph, they made fatal mistakes. In provinces where they formed governments, they often excluded the Muslim League from power-sharing arrangements. Muslim leaders felt marginalized. Fear grew that, in an independent India dominated by a Hindu majority, Muslims would become second-class citizens. This fear wasn't entirely unfounded. There were real communal tensions, riots, discrimination. Both communities had their extremists, their rabble-rousers who painted the other side as the enemy, and with each incident of violence, the chasm grew wider. In 1940, the Muslim League formally passed the Lahore Resolution, demanding independent states for Muslims in northwestern and eastern India. This was the birth of the Pakistan idea. But even then, it wasn't clear what Pakistan would look like, or if it would actually happen. Then came World War II. Britain, desperate for India's support, promised eventual independence, but they played Congress and the League against each other. Churchill, the British Prime Minister, despised Indian independence and once said he had not become the king's first minister to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire. Yet, Britain was bankrupt after the war, and holding on to India was becoming impossible. By 1946, communal violence was spiraling out of control. The Great Calcutta Killing in August 1946 saw 4,000 people slaughtered in just 4 days. Hindu-Muslim riots spread across Bihar, Bengal, and Punjab. Trains arrived at stations filled with corpses. Villages were burned. Women were abducted, raped, and mutilated. India was burning and the British wanted out, fast. Enter Cyril Radcliffe, a British lawyer who had never been to India before. In June 1947, he was given the most impossible task in modern history: draw a border dividing India and Pakistan. He had 5 weeks. 5 weeks to split a subcontinent home to 400 million people. Think about that for a moment. 5 weeks to decide the fate of millions, to divide communities that had lived together for centuries, to split villages, farms, rivers, and railways. Radcliffe had no knowledge of Indian geography, culture, or demographics. He worked from maps and census data, often outdated or inaccurate. He was supposed to divide based on Muslim majority and non-Muslim majority areas, but the reality on the ground was infinitely more complex. Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs lived intermixed in countless towns and villages. How do you draw a clean line through that? You can't, but Radcliffe tried anyway. He worked in secret, cloistered away, making decisions that would affect millions of lives. There was no consultation with the people who would actually live with these borders, no referendum, no democratic process, just a man with a pencil drawing lines on a map. Punjab and Bengal, the 2 provinces that would be split, were particularly complex. Punjab was home to large populations of Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs. Bengal was religiously divided but linguistically and culturally unified. Splitting them would be catastrophic. But split them they did. Here's the most disturbing part. The Radcliffe Line, the border that would determine who was Indian and who was Pakistani, was not announced until August 17, 1947. That's 2 days after independence. 2 days after India and Pakistan had already become separate nations. Nobody knew where the border was. Nobody knew which side of it they were on. Imagine that. You go to sleep as an Indian. You wake up as a Pakistani, or vice versa. Your home, your farm, your business, everything you own is suddenly in a different country. A country where you're now a minority, perhaps an unwanted minority. When the borders were finally announced, panic erupted. Muslims in India started fleeing towards Pakistan. Hindus and Sikhs in Pakistan fled towards India, but this wasn't an orderly migration. This was chaos. Trains became death traps. Thousands would crowd into trains heading to what they hoped would be safety. But mobs would stop these trains. They would slaughter everyone on board. Men, women, children, elderly. Nobody was spared. Trains would arrive at their destinations with every single passenger dead. Ghost trains, they called them. Silent testimonies to unspeakable horror. Convoys of refugees stretched for miles. Families walked with whatever possessions they could carry. Many carried nothing but the clothes on their backs. They walked through hostile territory, knowing that at any moment they could be attacked. And attacked they were. Armed mobs roamed the countryside. In Pakistan, Muslims attacked Hindu and Sikh refugees. In India, Hindus and Sikhs attacked Muslim refugees. Villages that had coexisted peacefully for generations turned on each other overnight. Neighbors became murderers. The violence was systematic, organized, and utterly brutal. Men were killed, but women faced something even worse. Mass rapes occurred on both sides of the border. Women were abducted, gang-raped, mutilated, and often killed. Some were forcibly married. Some were branded with religious symbols carved into their flesh. The sexual violence during partition stands as one of history's darkest chapters. An estimated 75,000 to 100,000 women were abducted, though the real number is likely much higher. Families committed what they called honor killings, murdering their own daughters and wives rather than letting them be captured and dishonored by the other community. Imagine being a father who had to make that choice. Imagine being a daughter who understood why her father was making it. Children were orphaned by the thousands. Some were adopted by families from the other religion, growing up never knowing their true origins. Others simply disappeared into the chaos, their fates unknown. Punjab saw the worst of the violence. This was the land of the Sikhs, and they felt betrayed by everyone. Their holiest sites were now in Pakistan. Their most fertile lands were being divided. The British, who had recruited Sikhs heavily into their army, were abandoning them. The Muslims wanted a nation for themselves. The Hindus had their own priorities. Sikhs formed armed groups, Jathas, that attacked Muslim refugees with military precision. Muslims retaliated with equal brutality. The cycle of revenge was endless. If your village was attacked, you would attack the next village over. If your sister was abducted, you would abduct 10 of theirs. Master Tara Singh, a Sikh leader, allegedly declared, "O Hindus and Sikhs, be ready for self-destruction, fight and face death, sacrifice everything for saving your religion." On the other side, Muslim leaders made equally inflammatory speeches. The rhetoric of hate from all sides fueled the flames. Cities that had been cosmopolitan centers of culture became battlegrounds. Lahore, which had been 50% Hindu and Sikh, became almost entirely Muslim as non-Muslims fled or were killed. Delhi, Amritsar, and other cities saw similar transformations. The plural, diverse India of old was being replaced by religiously homogeneous zones. Where were the leaders during all this? Where were Gandhi, Nehru, and Jinnah? Gandhi was in Bengal, trying to stop the violence there through his moral authority. He went on hunger strikes, walked barefoot between Hindu and Muslim neighborhoods, and pleaded for peace. His efforts in Bengal were somewhat successful, but he couldn't be everywhere. Nehru was overwhelmed. He had just become the Prime Minister of India, and his new nation was descending into civil war. He made attempts to stop the violence, but the Indian state was still being formed. The police and army were divided between India and Pakistan. There was no effective mechanism to restore order. Jinnah, now the Governor-General of Pakistan, was in Karachi, dealing with his own administrative nightmare. Pakistan inherited fewer resources, had to build a government from scratch, and was receiving millions of traumatized refugees. But here's what troubles historians. None of them predicted the scale of what would happen, or if they did, they didn't prepare for it. The partition plan made no provision for population transfers. There was no plan to protect refugees, no plan for maintaining law and order during the transition. Some argue they simply didn't believe it would be this bad. Others suggest they knew, but were so focused on gaining power that they downplayed the risks. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. What we know for certain is that their failure to prevent the violence haunted them all. Gandhi would be assassinated just months later by a Hindu extremist who thought he was too sympathetic to Muslims. Nehru would govern India for 17 years, but the trauma of partition never left him. Jinnah would die just a year after partition, his dream of Pakistan achieved, but at a cost he never imagined. How many died during partition, we'll never know for certain. The official estimates range from 200,000 to 2 million. Most historians settle on a figure between 1 and 2 million dead. But these are just numbers. Behind each number was a person, a name, a life, a family that mourned them. The violence continued for months after independence. It took until 1948 for things to somewhat stabilize, and even then, smaller incidents continued for years. The psychological scars lasted generations. 15 million people crossed the borders, the largest migration in human history at that time. They left behind homes, businesses, farms, and memories. Most never returned. Most never saw their birthplaces again. The economic cost was staggering. Industries were divided, trade routes were cut, infrastructure was split. The canal systems in Punjab, which required cooperation between India and Pakistan to function, became a source of conflict. Railways were divided, creating operational nightmares. But beyond economics and numbers, there was the cultural loss. Centuries of shared heritage, of Hindu-Muslim-Sikh synthesis in art, music, literature, and architecture, was torn apart. The composite culture of the subcontinent, which had created everything from Hindustani classical music to Urdu poetry to Mughal architecture, was fractured. Partition was supposed to solve the problem of religious coexistence. It didn't. It created new problems that persist to this day. Kashmir, a Muslim-majority region with a Hindu ruler, became disputed territory. 3 wars between India and Pakistan have been fought primarily over Kashmir. Countless lives have been lost in this frozen conflict that began in 1947. Millions of Muslims remained in India, and millions of Hindus and Sikhs remained in Pakistan. They faced discrimination, violence, and in some cases, forced conversion or exile in subsequent years. Pakistan's Hindu population has shrunk from about 15% at partition to less than 2% today. Both nations spent enormous resources on their militaries, preparing to fight each other rather than investing in their people's development. Nuclear weapons were developed. An arms race continues. Families remained divided. For decades, it was nearly impossible to visit relatives across the border. Grandparents died without meeting grandchildren. Siblings grew old without seeing each other. The partition also set a precedent. It suggested that religious or ethnic groups cannot live together peacefully and must be separated. This logic has been used to justify ethnic cleansing and forced population transfers in other conflicts worldwide. Behind the statistics were human beings. There's the story of Imam Baksh, who was shot in Karachi, but his wife put him on her back and walked 1,500 kilometers to Delhi to find medical help. They both survived. There's the story of Asghar Ali, a Muslim who stayed in India, hiding his family from mobs for days without food or water until the violence passed. There's the story of families divided at railway platforms, where in the chaos, children were separated from parents, some never to be reunited. There are stories of incredible humanity too. Hindus who hid Muslim neighbors, Muslims who protected Hindu families, Sikhs who escorted refugees to safety across enemy lines, unknown individuals who risked their lives to save strangers from the other community. These stories remind us that even in the darkest times, humanity persists. Today, India and Pakistan remain hostile neighbors. A line of control in Kashmir is one of the most militarized borders on Earth. Terrorist attacks, border skirmishes, and propaganda campaigns keep tensions high. But there are also movements for peace, people-to-people initiatives, artists, writers, and activists who work to bridge the divide, survivors of partition who share their stories, hoping that understanding the past will prevent repeating its mistakes. In recent years, there's been a resurgence of interest in partition stories. Books, films, and documentaries have explored this traumatic period. Oral history projects record survivors' testimonies before they're all gone. Museums and archives preserve documents and artifacts. This is crucial work because the lessons of partition remain relevant. In our world today, we see rising nationalism, religious extremism, and politicians exploiting communal divisions for power. We see refugees fleeing violence, borders being hardened, and communities turning on each other. Partition teaches us what happens when we let hate overcome humanity. When we see people as just their religion or ethnicity rather than as fellow human beings. When we prioritize political power over people's lives. The partition of India was not inevitable. It was the result of specific choices made by specific people in specific circumstances. The British prioritized a quick exit over a careful transition. Indian and Pakistani leaders prioritized political goals over protecting their people. Extremists on all sides chose violence over coexistence. Could it have been different? We'll never know, but we do know that the human cost was immeasurable and the wounds still haven't healed. The borders drawn by Radcliffe's pencil in 1947 were indeed drawn in blood. The blood of millions who paid the price for decisions made in distant offices by men who would never face their consequences. As we remember this tragedy, we must ask ourselves, what have we learned? Are we doing better, or are we repeating the same mistakes? The ghosts of partition still haunt South Asia. Until we acknowledge this history, understand its complexity, and commit to genuine reconciliation, those ghosts will never rest. This is the story of the Partition of India, a story of borders, blood, and the unimaginable resilience of the human spirit in the face of unspeakable horror. If this documentary opened your eyes to this crucial chapter of history, consider sharing it with others. Knowledge is the first step toward understanding, and understanding is the first step toward healing. Subscribe to Neural Battlefields for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. Hit the like button if you found this informative, and let me know in the comments what historical event you'd like us to explore next. Remember, those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. Let's make sure we never forget. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.